Welcome back to Zarela HOA Stories. Drop your country and city name in comments. Chapter 1: The Perfect Family, the Perfect Home. The Davis family had always been the pride of Briarwood Hills. A quiet, pristine neighborhood where everyone kept their lawns manicured and their lives spotless. The houses, all towering in perfect symmetry, lined the streets like soldiers on parade. It was the kind of place where nothing was out of place, and no one dared step out of line. Mark Davis stood in front of his immaculate lawn, inspecting the lines of his freshly cut grass with a satisfied nod. His home, a grand two-story house with perfectly trimmed hedges, was the envy of the block. Everything about him screamed success. Tall, well-dressed, and with an ever-present smile that reflected his belief in his own perfection, Mark was admired by the entire neighborhood, especially by the HOA. Behind him, his wife, Rebecca, adjusted the flowers in the front garden, arranging them in neat rows. She was the epitome of a suburban wife, always smiling, always doing what was expected. Rebecca took pride in the house, the garden, and in maintaining the perfect image of their family. But inside the house, not everything was perfect. Sophie Davis, their 17-year-old daughter, stared out of her bedroom window at the quiet street. The familiar sight of neighbors walking by, kids playing, and the faint sounds of lawnmowers filled the air. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She felt trapped in a house where perfection was demanded, where every move was scrutinized by the prying eyes of the HOA, and where her father's expectations loomed over her like an insurmountable mountain. Her father's idea of the perfect family didn't leave room for her to be herself. Mark had always pushed her to be someone she wasn't, someone he could show off, someone who fit into his ideal of what a family should be. No matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. Sophie wanted freedom. She wanted to paint, to explore, to live life on her terms. But every time she tried to express herself, her father was there, pulling her back into the mold he had created for her. Sophie sighed, running her fingers through her messy hair as she turned away from the window. She could hear Mark and Rebecca talking downstairs, their voices loud and cheerful. But Sophie wasn't in the mood for their fake smiles and forced conversations. She grabbed her sketchpad and started drawing, letting the pencil glide across the paper as she imagined a world far beyond the white picket fence of Briarwood Hills. Downstairs, Mark and Rebecca were preparing for yet another HOA meeting. Mark was speaking with Gary Holloway, the HOA president, a man whose obsession with rules and perfection was matched only by his self-righteous attitude. Gary was well dressed in a suit, as always, his face stern and disapproving. He stood in the living room, flipping through the pages of a neatly organized binder. "I see you've been doing well, Mark," Gary said, his voice cold but friendly. "Your lawn is pristine, and the house is in perfect order. The neighborhood is proud to have you as an example of what it means to follow the rules." Mark puffed out his chest, a smile tugging at his lips. "It's all about maintaining the standard, Gary. You know how it is. The HOA does a great job keeping things in line." Rebecca nodded, but her eyes wandered nervously toward the hallway where Sophie's bedroom door was closed. She couldn't help but worry about the growing tension between her husband and their daughter. Sophie had become more and more defiant lately, and Rebecca wasn't sure how to handle it. Gary noticed her unease. "Is everything all right with Sophie?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. Rebecca hesitated. "She's going through a phase. You know how teenagers can be. She's just been a little more distant lately." Gary raised an eyebrow. "Distant, huh?" "I've noticed her outside more, not really adhering to the rules we set about garden decorations." He paused, his lips curling into a knowing smile. "I understand she's a creative one, but creativity has its limits. The neighborhood can't tolerate anything that stands out too much." Rebecca forced a smile. "We're handling it, Gary. She'll come around." Gary nodded. "Good. We can't let her disrupt the harmony of Briarwood Hills. If everyone started doing their own thing, it would be chaos." Upstairs, Sophie's hand paused mid-sketch as she overheard the conversation. Disrupt the harmony, her father's words stung, and she threw her pencil across the room in frustration. She was done with the perfect life her father was trying to force on her. She wasn't going to spend another day pretending to be someone she wasn't. Sophie stormed out of her room, down the stairs, and into the living room. Mark and Rebecca looked up in surprise, as if they hadn't expected her to emerge from her self-imposed exile. Sophie's eyes flashed with defiance. "I'm not doing this anymore," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I'm not living under your rules, not under your perfect little image." Mark stood up, his face flushed with anger. "What are you talking about, Sophie? You're acting like a child. We're doing this for you, for your future." "No, you're doing it for yourself," Sophie shot back. "You don't care about what I want. You care about how it looks to everyone else. You care about them, not me." Rebecca stepped forward, her voice soft, but filled with concern. "Sophie, calm down. We just want you to fit in, to be happy." Sophie shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't get it. I'm suffocating in here. I want to paint. I want to be myself, but I can't because you and the HOA are watching every move I make." Mark's expression hardened. "You'll ruin everything if you keep this up, Sophie. The HOA won't stand for it." Sophie turned to leave, but Mark grabbed her arm. "You're not going anywhere. Not until you've learned how to respect the rules of this house." Sophie yanked her arm away, her heart pounding. "I don't care about your rules anymore, Dad. I'm done." She ran out the door, slamming it behind her, leaving Mark and Rebecca standing in stunned silence. Chapter 2: The Growing Divide. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light over the perfectly manicured lawns of Briarwood Hills. It was another picture-perfect morning in the neighborhood, the kind that Mark Davis always prided himself on. His home, his lawn, his life, all flawless. But inside, the cracks were starting to show. Sophie hadn't come downstairs for breakfast, not for the first time. Mark glanced at the clock, 8:30 a.m. He couldn't help but feel a knot in his stomach. It wasn't like her to miss a meal, especially not when the HOA president was coming over to inspect their home later that afternoon. He knocked lightly on Sophie's bedroom door. "Sophie?" His voice was stern, but it was laced with frustration. He didn't want to be the bad guy, but this rebellion had gone on long enough. "We need to talk." There was a long silence. Mark's hand lingered on the doorknob. Sophie wasn't just late to breakfast, she hadn't been talking to him for days. He opened the door. Sophie sat at her desk, sketching something in her notebook. Her room was dim, only the soft glow of the morning sun peeking through the curtains. It was the one place in the house where Sophie could be herself, away from the rules, away from the perfect facade Mark tried to create. She didn't even look up when Mark entered. "Sophie," Mark said again, more firmly this time. "You can't keep avoiding me. I need you to understand, what you're doing with that mural is wrong. It's not just about you anymore. It's about the whole neighborhood." Sophie slammed her notebook shut. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Dad," she snapped, standing up and walking toward the window. She avoided his gaze, but Mark saw the clenched fists at her sides. "I don't get it, Sophie," Mark said, his voice softer now. "Why are you so determined to break the rules? You know how important this is to me, to us. Why can't you just fall in line?" Sophie turned, her eyes blazing with frustration. "Because I'm not you, Dad. I'm not the perfect little image you want me to be. I'm not going to spend my life trying to impress the HOA. I want to do something real, something that means something." Mark's jaw tightened. "And what does painting a garage wall mean to you, huh? You're throwing everything away for this freedom of yours. This is a perfect life, Sophie. What more do you want?" Sophie laughed bitterly. "A life of my own. A chance to breathe. Not this suffocating cage you've built for me, where every move I make is scrutinized." "I'm suffocating, Dad." Mark's expression darkened. "You don't understand, Sophie. We have to follow the rules. The HOA is what keeps this neighborhood in line, and it's what keeps us in the place we're at. I'm doing this for you, for our future. Sophie shook her head. No. You're doing it for you. To make sure everyone thinks you're the perfect dad. The perfect family. Mark took a step forward. Enough of this, Sophie. You're going to fix that mural. Today. Or there will be consequences. Sophie's face flushed with anger, but she stood her ground. I'll never do it, Dad. You can't make me. Mark's eyes narrowed. Don't test me, Sophie. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. You're going to do what I say, or there will be consequences. He turned and left, slamming the door behind him, the sound echoing in Sophie's chest. Later that afternoon, Gary Holloway arrived, his suit crisp and his smile as fake as the perfection of Briarwood Hills. He was here for his routine inspection, to make sure every homeowner was adhering to the HOA's strict guidelines. Mark greeted him at the door with a handshake that was just a bit too firm. Gary, good to see you. We've been keeping things in order. You'll be pleased. Gary glanced around, nodding in approval. As always, Mark. The lawn is immaculate, the house looks perfect. But I need to speak to Sophie about that mural. I've heard it's causing some issues. Mark's eyes flickered with a brief flash of panic. He hadn't wanted to bring Sophie into this, but he knew Gary wouldn't back down. He turned to Rebecca, who was standing nearby, quietly watching the exchange. Rebecca, could you go find Sophie? Mark asked, his voice tight. Rebecca hesitated, looking between Mark and Gary. Do you really think we should involve her? This is between us, isn't it? Mark's expression hardened. The rules are the rules. I won't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Rebecca sighed and went upstairs. The moment she left the room, Gary turned to Mark with a look of quiet satisfaction. You know, Mark, the neighbors are starting to talk. A rebellious teenager is the last thing this neighborhood needs. It's not just the mural, it's the way she's been carrying on lately. We can't have that. The HOA isn't here to let anyone disrupt the order we've established. Mark nodded. I know, Gary. I'll handle it. You can count on me. Gary smiled, his eyes glinting. Good. I'm glad you understand. We need people like you to keep the neighborhood in line. Upstairs, Rebecca knocked on Sophie's door, but there was no response. She pushed the door open, finding Sophie sitting on the floor with her sketchpad in her lap, staring at the wall. Sophie, Gary's here, Rebecca said gently. He wants to talk to you about the mural. Sophie stood up, a cold smile on her lips. Of course he does. He always gets his way, doesn't he? Rebecca frowned. It's not like that, Sophie. Please, don't make things harder for your father. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back, not wanting to let her mother see her pain. You don't get it, Mom. He's not trying to fix anything. He's trying to break me. He doesn't care about me, he only cares about looking perfect in front of people who don't matter. Rebecca walked over and put her hand on Sophie's shoulder. I'm sorry, sweetie. I know this isn't easy. But your father, he's doing what he thinks is best. I need you to just talk to Gary, please. Sophie stared at her mother, then at the door, where she knew Gary was waiting. She felt the weight of the world pushing down on her chest. She didn't want to be the perfect daughter anymore. But what choice did she have? With a deep sigh, Sophie grabbed her jacket and headed for the door. Chapter 3, The Breaking Point. Sophie stood in the living room, her hands trembling as she faced her father. The tension between them was suffocating, thick with months of pent-up anger and disappointment. Mark stood across from her, his expression tight, his eyes filled with frustration. This wasn't a conversation, it was a battle. And Sophie was tired of fighting. You're going to fix that mural, Sophie. Mark's voice was low, controlled, but it carried a weight of finality. His eyes were hard, the same eyes that used to be filled with pride when he looked at her. Now, they were filled with something darker. "I'm not," Sophie replied, her voice steady but her insides twisted with fear. "I'm done being controlled by you and the HOA." Mark's hand clenched into a fist. "This isn't just about you. It's about the whole neighborhood. What will people think if they see you making a mockery of this place?" His voice cracked, his frustration turning to anger. Sophie's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell him how suffocating everything had become, how trapped she felt under the weight of his expectations. But the words wouldn't come out. All she could do was stand there, staring at him, feeling like she was about to break. "I'm not going to apologize for wanting something real," Sophie said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I don't want to live like this anymore, Dad. I don't want to be the perfect little daughter who does everything you say." Mark's face darkened. "You think I want perfection? You think I do this for fun? No. I do it because it's what keeps us safe, keeps us respected. You have no idea what it's like to work for everything we have." He stepped forward, his face inches from hers. "I've worked hard to make sure you never have to struggle, to make sure you have everything you could ever want. And you throw it all away for what? A mural?" Sophie felt the sting of his words. She had heard them too many times before. About how hard he worked, about how he had given her everything. She wanted to scream, to run, but she stayed rooted to the spot, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. "You don't get it, Dad," she whispered. "I don't want things. I want to be me. But you're not letting me. You just want me to be your perfect daughter in a perfect house, in a perfect neighborhood." Mark's expression softened for a moment, and Sophie saw a flicker of something, guilt? Regret? But then it was gone, replaced by the same cold, controlled mask he always wore. "Enough, Sophie," Mark said through gritted teeth. "You're going to fix it. Or I will make you." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Sophie standing in the middle of the living room, feeling more alone than ever. Sophie couldn't breathe. Her chest felt like it was caving in, and the walls of the house seemed to close in around her. She needed to get out. She needed space. She couldn't stay here anymore, not with him. Not with them. She grabbed her jacket from the hallway and walked out the front door, the cold air hitting her like a slap in the face. She didn't know where she was going, just that she needed to get away from Briarwood Hills, away from the life her father had built for her. She needed to breathe, to figure out who she was, away from the suffocating pressure of expectations. She walked quickly, ignoring the stares of neighbors who passed by. They all knew her as the Davis girl, the one with the perfect family, the perfect house. She hated it. She hated how everyone looked at her like she was a prize to be won. She turned the corner and walked into the park at the edge of the neighborhood. The trees were bare, the ground covered in dry leaves, and the air smelled like cold earth. She sat down on a bench, her legs shaking as she stared at the empty path in front of her. She pulled her knees to her chest and hugged them tightly, trying to hold herself together. Minutes passed, and then an hour. Sophie lost track of time. She didn't want to go back. She didn't want to face her father again, to hear him tell her what she should and shouldn't do with her life. She was so tired. So tired of fighting, of feeling like she was always one mistake away from being thrown out of her own home. Back at the Davis house, Mark sat in his study, hands clasped tightly together on the desk. The conversation with Sophie had left him feeling unsettled. He had never seen her so defiant, so angry. Part of him wanted to understand, but the other part of him was consumed by the need to control, to keep everything in line. He couldn't lose her, not like this. Not to a mural. Not to the HOA's rules, but mostly, not to her own desire for freedom. He had worked too hard to build their perfect life. He wasn't about to let it slip away. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from Gary Holloway, the HOA president. "Mark, we need to talk. The mural situation has escalated. We can't let her get away with this. Meet me at 4 p.m. Mark stared at the message, his mind racing. He knew what Gary was asking. He knew what had to be done. The HOA's rules were clear, and Sophie's defiance couldn't be allowed to disrupt their perfect neighborhood. He felt a cold resolve settle over him. He would fix this. He would make Sophie understand, even if it meant pushing her harder than ever before. Sophie didn't hear her phone buzzing in her pocket. She was too lost in her thoughts, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how much longer she could keep running. She had to go back, face her father, and face whatever he was planning next. But as she stood up to leave the park, a figure approached her. It was Frank, the old neighbor who lived a few houses down. He had always been quiet, a bit of a recluse, but Sophie had always found him kind. "Hey, Sophie," Frank called, his voice gentle. "Everything all right?" Sophie wiped her eyes quickly and smiled weakly. "Just thinking," she said, her voice shaky. "Everything's a mess." Frank sat down next to her, his eyes soft with understanding. "I know it's hard," he said quietly. "But I've seen what's been happening. I've been around long enough to see when a kid needs to get away from it all." Sophie looked at him, surprised. "You think I should leave?" Frank's gaze was steady. "Sometimes, running isn't the answer, but standing up to the people who hold the reins, that's what takes courage." Sophie felt a surge of emotion. Courage. She had no idea what her next step was, but maybe she could find it with the help of someone who understood. Chapter 4: The Final Confrontation. The Davis house was eerily quiet. Mark had locked himself in his study, trying to bury the knot of anxiety that gnawed at him. The message from Gary Holloway earlier had unsettled him more than he'd care to admit. It was the reminder he needed. The HOA was watching, and if Sophie didn't comply, the perfect life Mark had carefully built for his family could come crashing down. He couldn't let that happen. He glanced out the window toward the backyard, seeing Sophie's rebellious mural, a splash of color that didn't belong in their perfect neighborhood. His jaw tightened. The mural was a direct challenge, an insult to everything he had worked so hard to preserve. He had to make her see that. Sophie hadn't come home since she stormed out earlier. Mark had checked her room, but she wasn't there. His heart pounded with both guilt and fear. She was spiraling away from him, from their family. If he didn't act now, he might lose her forever. Down the street, Sophie walked briskly, her jacket zipped tight against the cold. She had left the park in a daze, her mind racing. Frank's words kept echoing in her head. Sometimes, standing up for yourself is the bravest thing you can do. But what did standing up mean? She wasn't even sure if she could stand in her own home anymore. She reached the edge of Briarwood Hills, where the neighborhood met the woods, the place where she had always gone when she needed to escape. The scent of pine and damp earth filled her lungs as she walked further, her steps heavy with the weight of her thoughts. She hadn't told anyone, but the thought of leaving Briarwood Hills, leaving her family, had crossed her mind more than once. She didn't want to be the perfect daughter, trapped in a house full of perfect expectations. She wanted to be free, to paint, to live without constantly worrying about what her father or the HOA would think. But could she really leave? Was that the answer? She stopped at a small clearing in the woods, breathing in the cool air, trying to find clarity. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. It was Mark. "Sophie," Mark's voice cracked with emotion as he stepped into the clearing. His face was pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperation. "You don't have to do this. You can fix everything. Just come home. Please." Sophie shook her head, taking a step back. "I can't, Dad. I can't live like this anymore. You don't see me. You only see what you want me to be." She wiped away a tear that had escaped, her voice trembling. "I can't be your perfect daughter. I'm not like you." Mark took a step forward, his voice pleading now. "Sophie, you don't understand. I'm doing this for you. You think you want freedom, but the world doesn't work like that. People will judge you. They'll tear you down. I'm trying to protect you. Protect me? Sophie's voice rose in anger. You're suffocating me, Dad. You think I can't see that? She shook her head, eyes burning with frustration. I'm not you, and I never will be. Mark's face twisted in pain. Why can't you just listen to me? I'm your father. I know what's best for you. This is for your own good. Sophie's chest tightened. For my own good? Or for your image? For your perfect life? She paused, her eyes filled with hurt. I'm not a puppet, Dad. I can't live in a world where nothing I do matters except for what other people think. Mark reached out to her, his voice breaking. Sophie, please. You don't understand. You'll regret this. You'll regret throwing everything away. Sophie stood her ground. I'd rather regret being me than regret being someone I'm not. Mark's face darkened, and for a moment, Sophie saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, a cold, unyielding fury. He stepped toward her, his hands shaking. I've been patient with you, Sophie. But enough is enough. If you're not going to listen to me, I'll make you understand. Sophie recoiled. What does that mean? What are you going to do, lock me up in my room like a child? Mark's lips curled into a tight, controlled smile. I've been more than fair. But now, I'll make sure you learn. You'll respect this family and the rules of this neighborhood. Before Sophie could respond, he grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her back toward the house. She yanked away, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't the father she knew, the man who had once held her when she was little, the man who had always promised to protect her. No, Dad. Sophie screamed, trying to break free. Stop. You don't get it. You're hurting me. Mark's grip tightened, and Sophie struggled harder, her voice growing desperate. Let go of me. Please. The sound of approaching cars reached their ears. The HOA was coming. Sophie knew it. Mark knew it. This was it. The moment where everything would come to a head. With a burst of strength, Sophie broke free from her father's grip and ran, but Mark grabbed her again. The struggle between them was frantic, filled with anger and fear. Sophie fought back, but her father's strength was too much. Then, just as quickly, the scene changed. A car pulled up, and a figure stepped out, Gary Holloway, the HOA president. Sophie, stop. Gary's voice boomed, his presence an overwhelming force. He saw the chaos unfolding between father and daughter, and a cold, calculating smile spread across his face. Sophie, you're making a mistake, Gary said calmly, stepping forward. This is about more than just you. This is about the image of this neighborhood, about maintaining the perfect order we've worked so hard for. Sophie's breath came in ragged gasps as she looked between her father and Gary. The two of them were part of the same system, the same oppressive force. She realized, in that moment, that she was trapped in a system that wanted nothing but conformity. Mark's voice was shaking. Sophie, please. For once, just listen to me. Don't throw everything away. Sophie looked at him, her heart breaking. You don't get it. You never did. With that, she turned and ran into the woods, the sound of her father's voice calling her name fading behind her. But as she ran, she knew that things could never go back to the way they were. The truth was out, and the fight for her freedom was just beginning. Chapter 5, The Dark Revelation. The night was thick with tension. Sophie stood at the edge of the woods, her heart still racing from the struggle with her father. The cold air bit at her skin, but it felt like nothing compared to the pain inside her. She had never felt more alone. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The fight with Mark, Gary's cold presence, the words that had been exchanged. She could still hear her father's voice ringing in her ears, "You'll respect this family, Sophie. You'll follow the rules." But Sophie knew, deep down, that following the rules was what had broken her. It had crushed her spirit, made her feel invisible. She couldn't go back to that life. She couldn't go back to pretending she was someone she wasn't. She heard footsteps behind her, the crunch of leaves underfoot. She turned, heart leaping in her chest, half expecting her father to come running after her. But instead, it was Frank. "Are you all right, Sophie?" Frank's voice was soft, filled with concern. Sophie wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. "Yeah. I don't know what to do anymore." Frank stepped closer, looking down at the ground, then back up at her. "I've been around long enough to see what's been happening. You've got the weight of that family on your shoulders, and it's not right." Sophie swallowed hard. "I can't keep pretending, Frank. I can't do it. I'm suffocating." Frank nodded. "I know. But you're stronger than you think. This fight, it's bigger than just you and your dad. It's about this whole neighborhood, about people like Gary who think they can control everything." He paused, his eyes softening. "You're not the only one who feels trapped. But you're the one who can change it." Sophie felt a surge of determination, but it was mixed with fear. The idea of standing up against her father and the HOA was overwhelming, but Frank's words sparked something inside her. Maybe she could fight. Maybe she could have her voice heard. "You think I can do it?" she asked, her voice shaky. Frank gave her a small smile. "I think you already are." Back at the Davis house, Mark paced the living room, his thoughts a whirlwind. He hadn't meant to push Sophie so far. He had only wanted what was best for her, what was best for the family. But now, everything felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He heard a knock at the door, followed by Gary Holloway's voice. "Mark, we need to talk. It's time we address this rebellion of Sophie's. The neighborhood's starting to take notice." Mark opened the door, his face weary but resolute. "Come in, Gary. I know what you're going to say." Gary stepped inside, his cold smile never faltering. "This has gone far enough. Sophie's actions are not just disrespectful, they're dangerous. If we let her keep doing this, the entire neighborhood will start questioning the rules. We can't have that." Mark ran a hand through his hair. "I know, Gary. But I can't just force her to change. She's so stubborn." Gary's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice, Mark. The HOA has rules, and those rules are what keep us in control. You need to stop playing nice with her. If she won't comply, we'll make sure she does." Mark's eyes widened. "What do you mean, make sure she does?" "I can't." Gary raised his hand, cutting him off. "I'm not suggesting anything extreme, Mark. But you know as well as I do that when someone refuses to follow the rules, the consequences are inevitable. Sophie has to learn that lesson. And you need to make it clear." Mark's heart hammered in his chest, the words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. He had always known the HOA had power, but hearing it so bluntly, it made everything feel real. He was caught between his daughter's rebellion and the HOA's iron grip. "I'll handle it," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. Gary nodded. "Good. This has to be dealt with. We can't afford any more disruption. For the sake of this community, and your family." As Gary left, Mark stood frozen in the doorway. He had a choice to make. But deep down, he knew that no matter what decision he made, things would never be the same again. Sophie walked back toward the house, each step heavier than the last. She knew she couldn't run forever, but the thought of facing her father again sent a cold shiver down her spine. What would he do? Would he try to force her back into line? She had no answers, just the uncertainty of what was coming next. She paused at the door, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The house felt too quiet. Too empty. "Dad," she called, her voice echoing in the hallway. Mark appeared from the study, his face a mask of control. He didn't look angry. He didn't look relieved. He just looked cold. Sophie, he said quietly, his eyes narrowing slightly. We need to talk. Sophie crossed her arms, standing her ground. I'm not going to apologize for what I did, Dad. I'm not going to tear down my mural. I can't live like this anymore. Mark's lips curled into a thin smile. I didn't expect you to apologize, Sophie. But I think you'll come to understand that you don't have a choice in the matter. Sophie's heart sank. What do you mean? Mark stepped closer, his voice dropping low. You forced my hand. You're not going to walk away from this. Not without consequences. Sophie felt a cold chill run through her. You can't do this. But Mark's eyes were unwavering. Watch me. If you like our video, then make sure to like and subscribe our channel. Thanks, we will back in next video.